Hey guys, this is Paige Pierce. I'm here for Physics of Flight, and today I'm going to talk to you about maximum distance.
We're going to be talking about rollers. And if you know anything about me, you know that I love throwing flex shots. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Welcome to Physics of Flight 4. This time we're doing things a little bit differently. I caught up with Team Dynamic Disc's touring pros in Arizona, and each of them took some time to tell a little bit about a skill that they've perfected on the course. I've organized those segments into 3 episodes here for Physics of Flight 4. First, we'll talk to Paige Pierce, who's certainly qualified to talk about how and when to go for big distance.
So first thing you got to think about is, when do you go for it? There's some times where it's appropriate and there's sometimes when it's not. Most of these are in tournament I'm talking about. So in a tournament, the only time I'm really going for maximum distance is if there's no parameters left and right. I want a wide open fairway where I have no chance of going OB, or if I'm in a distance competition. Now, what I'm doing when I'm throwing max distance is I'm throwing a really overstable long-range disc that's fast, so my Ballista Pros, on a nice angle like this. I'm putting the disc really high in the air, but to make up for that height, I have to make sure I turn my wrist and I put a lot of snap on it. Otherwise, with it being so high and exposed to all the wind in the air, it's gonna lose speed too quick and it's gonna dump out to the left and kind of get a backwards tilt on the disc. Other than those 2 things, I'm thinking a lot about my footing. I want to make sure that I have a lot of room behind the tee pad. So sometimes you get to a tee pad and the front of the tee pad drops off. Don't go for max distance then. Also, sometimes the back of the tee pad has a wall or rocks or a step up. Don't go for max distance there either, because your footing's going to be all off and your arms are going to beat your feet to the front of the tee pad. This will cause for an errant release and you're going to flip the disc over. So anytime any of those things are happening, please don't go for max distance. Again, only do this if you're in a wide open field and you have no out of bounds around. One thing I change for when I'm going for maximum distance is my footwork. My last 3 or 4 steps are the same, but at the beginning I kind of do like a little bit of like Fred Flintstone feet. I don't have a specific reason for this other than to kind of build that momentum up in a smaller space. A lot of times you don't have a whole lot of room to work with, so when I have to jam it in, it just gets my feet moving in the right timing with a smaller space. So when I'm throwing this high turned over angle, the reason I'm doing so is so I get the full flight. You guys hear a lot of people saying full flight or S shot or stuff like this. This is how the disc flies the furthest, is when you throw something overstable on a super turned angle and it pans as long as it can, but it still has enough time to get its full flight back out to the left. So if you don't get it high enough, after you get that initial turn, it's going to hit the ground. This is why you have to get it high enough so it has time to correct itself in the air and finish out to the left. For me, I'm aiming really far at the left side of the fairway on that angle, so I have the entire middle and right side of the fairway to make the disc stretch before it comes back to the left. So one thing that's really important when you're throwing for max distance is the wind. What is it doing? You need to know this because it's going to change the angle or the disc choice or where you're aiming. Some of them are going to help you. Some of them are going to make it harder. Neither of these mean that you should or shouldn't do it. It's just something you have to think and adapt to. If it's a tailwind, it's going to make the disc fly further. It's going to push it. So absolutely, let's go for max distance. If it's wide open and there's a tailwind, absolutely I will. If there's a headwind, it's going to try to push the disc backwards and to flip it. So when this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I can't go for max distance, but it does mean I have to adjust for that. So I can't put it quite as high. So I'm going to throw more of a flatter, lower release, but I'm still going to have that angle. It's just not going to be as exaggerated. If it's ever pushing from right to left, I'm going to have to put a little bit more of an angle on it than I think. And if it's pushing from left to right, I'm not gonna be able to put as much angle as I think, or else I'm gonna get an accidental roller. So make sure you test the wind before you throw this shot, but I would say the most effective way to throw max distance is from a slight tailwind or no wind at all. So again, the things I'm really thinking of when going for max distance is when it's appropriate, what my footwork is looking like, what disc I'm choosing, what angle I'm putting it on, and how much room do I have to work with. So when you're looking for max distance, make sure to account for all these things, and thank you guys for watching.
Sometimes going high and getting that full flight isn't an option. In those cases, it can be better to stay along the ground. Here's Eric Oakley with some tips on throwing rollers.
What's up guys, Eric Oakley here, and we're back with another Physics of Flight, and we're going to be talking about rollers. Rollers are an incredibly useful shot. They allow you to stay underneath stuff and go a long way with a little bit of effort. We're going to talk about a few different things when choosing the right disc to throw for rollers, how discs roll, and the different shot types you can actually throw for rollers. So starting off with choosing the right disc. Using an understable disc can be really easy to help you learn rollers, but you should also keep in mind the nose, how it will roll and how it'll stay up. This is really important. Some discs might be understable, but their nose shape slants in either direction, which will either cause them to fall and go more that direction, and then they actually are a little bit less controllable. That's a difficult thing to have, and I use the Thief or a really beat up Felon for this because they are good. They have a good blunt nose, so they kind of roll like a wheel and they'll stay up for a long time before they want to peel to the right. You can throw faster discs for rollers, but that takes a lot more energy put behind the disc because that sharper edge makes it difficult, that it has to be precise for it to want to continue to roll. So when learning to throw rollers, there are two real types of shots to throw for a backhand roller. We'll talk about forehand rollers in a second. Backhand rollers, you can either lay them down yourself where you lean back and really put the disc down on the angle. That is one way to learn how to throw a roller, and I suggest everyone learning to do that first because it's an over-exaggeration of that Anheuser flight. And if you can really get your body to contort and work into that to allow you to roll it down, you're gonna find success. And then once you start to establish getting a little bit more power behind your shots, you're gonna be able to take shots and throw them with a little bit of Anheuser and just snap them out there and trust the disc's understability to pull itself over onto the roller's edge and start running once it hits the ground. And those are the real two types of shot for backhand. Forehand, you can do a little bit of the same, but for the most part, when we see for forehand rollers, you'll see players throw them down, straight down on angle, which is great. When you're throwing forehand rollers, it's important to trust the more overstable discs. Because you're putting a lot of snap and you're actually starting them more upright, and you're gonna want the disc to fight you as long as possible. So rollers are really interesting because they roll the same way they would fly. An understable disc really wants to get itself and go to the right. A stable disc really wants to stay straight when it rolls if you get it up on a good angle. And an overstable disc will want to go to the left if you get it down because it's wanting to cut. It's going to finish to the left just like it would if you threw it in the air. This is for a right-handed player, obviously switch it for a left-handed player. So that becomes a really interesting topic with what roller to choose, because sometimes you don't want it to burn to the right and you want it to stay straight. So you might want to try throwing that more straight disc like an Escape. But if you want that quicker flip, you might want to go with a Thief or a Witness. Now, if you want that overstable stuff, I would suggest something like a Getaway or a Felon. Those would be great. I lean on the fairway drivers when it comes to my rollers. A lot of other players will use the high-speed stuffs like Renegades or Havocs, which are also really good discs. They go a lot farther, but for me, they take a lot more energy to get behind it. Where the Thief or Fief, for me, allows me to just rip on the disc, trust that it's gonna get down on a good cut angle, knowing that the disc's understability is gonna naturally want it to pull, to stand up and fight the entire flight, or fight the entire roll, I guess, if you will. Roll, and then still get back to the right. So if I'm ever really thinking like, all right, it's a low ceiling, I can't go left, that's dangerous, I might throw a roller and put it down and trust that this is going to get down, boop, cut to the right, and give me a good opportunity to stay in a safe spot. Putters are incredible rollers to get out of trouble because you don't have to throw them very hard and you can just lay them down nice and easy and allow them to just roll slightly to get around trees and do that kind of stuff. Rather than having to try and use the air, you might not have the ceiling space. So you can use these rollers. You can cut them, you can make them quick flip. So trust your putters whenever you're trying to learn some of these rollers. And you know what? When you're in practice and you're behind a bush, try it, see what happens. So that's a little bit about rollers. Rollers are a great shot to have in your bag. They offer versatility and can get you out of a lot of trouble. So get out there and start rolling some discs. Try the Thief, it's my favorite.
If you've seen AJ Risley play before, chances are you've seen him throw a flex shot. He's here to explain a little bit more about how and why he works that shot into his game.
Hi, welcome to the Physics of Flight. My name is AJ Risley, and if you know anything about me, you know that I love throwing flex shots. So that's what we're going to talk about today. You might ask me, AJ, why do you like throwing the flex shot so much? Why is the flex line so appealing and essential to your game? And I would tell you, thank you for asking, actually, first of all. I appreciate that question. I like throwing flex shots because for me, well, I'll start off by saying that when I come up to a new disc golf hole, a new flight path that I have to figure out, I try to start at the end and work my way backwards. And what I mean by that is I'll look at the basket, look at the trees that might be surrounding it, look at the terrain, you know, whether that's the hills around it, the slopes, the ground, and I will work my way backwards from the basket to the tee. And I'll try to find the parts of the fairway that I can manipulate and exploit the most. For me, when I look at the hole backwards like that, I can kind of get in my head a different kind of picture of the flight that I want to create. And so for the flex line, I'm able to control the second half of the flight a little bit more precisely with those flex shots. Meaning I can, if I'm trying to land the disc flat at the end of its flight, I'm probably gonna wanna go with something overstable and start it on an anhyzer and get that, that anhyzer to hyzer shot, which is the flex shot. So that's kind of why I rely a little bit more on those flex lines, is just knowing what's gonna happen in the second half of the flight of the disc and being able to control that. And then next you would ask me, AJ, what kind of discs do you use for flex shots? And because I like to talk and I like to hear my own voice, I would explain the flex shot to you first and say that flex shot consists of a flight pattern that starts out with an anhyzer angle. So for me, a right-handed backhand player, the left side of the disc is going to be higher than the right side of the disc. That's an anhyzer. It's going to start with an anhyzer and work its way to flat and finish with the hyzer angle at the end of its flight. That's a flex shot. And in order to get that flex shot, I'm going to use discs that are more overstable. So those overstable discs, for me personally, are distance drivers. I use the Enforcer. Fairway drivers, I'll use the Criminal. And mid-range discs drivers, mid-range drivers, I'll use the Bard. So, flat releases and hyzer releases, for players that are just beginning, those can be pretty difficult. I know it was pretty difficult for me when I was first starting out. It can be pretty tough to get that anhyzer release because really at first the discs are pretty heavy and we're not used to pulling it across our body. And so it takes a lot of extra thought and extra effort to get your arm up like that. And to get that anhyzer release where you're starting high and finishing low. But there are different ways that you can practice that and make it more normal for you. And for me, what I do is before every flex shot that I'm going to throw, whether it's a tee shot or an approach or fairway shot or whatever, I will stand on the tee or in the fairway and do a few practice swings and really get get that anhyzer release down where I'm starting, like I said, starting high and finishing low across my body. And if I'm gonna really exaggerate my anhyzer angle, if I'm gonna try to throw higher, or if I am throwing something very, very, very overstable that I need to throw more anhyzer on, I can't just turn my wrist more. I can't, you know, putting my arm up more isn't gonna get the job done completely. I need to use more of my body, and so you'll see me kind of, instead of just straight up, stand straight up and down, I'll kind of arch my back, and that kind of changes the plane that we throw on from flat to arching your back, kind of gives you that anhyzer high to low type body movement. So when we throw flex shots, we are exposing a lot of that underside of the disc to the wind more than we would with just a straight up hyzer. You might see, if you have a crosswind coming from the left to right, that anhyzer release is going to force the disc to get pushed up. And then on the other side, if the wind's coming right to left, anhyzer release out of your hand, the disc might want to get pushed down by that wind. But the nice thing about a flex shot and throwing those overstable discs is they're going to fight back. And the good thing about doubling those different wind exposures is you might get, from a left to right wind, you might get pushed up a little bit at the first half of the flight, but if you have an overstable enough disc, it's going to fight back, get to a hyzer angle, and then the wind will push it down. So if you have possibly danger on the left side, you would see me throw an overstable disc on that flex line if there's wind coming left to right, because I know that at the end of the flight, the disc is going to be on the hyzer angle and the left to right wind is going to push the disc down. And then, again, conversely, if we have a right to left wind, using that kind of mentality that I had and that thought process I had earlier, that I mentioned earlier, about thinking about the second half of the flight, thinking about from basket to tee instead of tee to basket. If I'm looking at a right to left wind, I'm going to throw an overstable disc that I know at the end of its flight, the right side of the disc is going to be higher than the left. And if that right to left wind is there, like I think it is, it's going to push it up and push it to the left and away from all that danger. So the flex shot is it's an advanced maneuver in our disc golf world. And so I've got some tips for how to develop that consistency with those flex shots. First, just like everything else in life, is repetition. If you want to be good at something and really master that skill, you just have to do it. You have to do it over and over and over and learn from each and every instance and each and every situation. So what I try to teach a lot is just repetition, do it over and over, and that's really, for me, that's my biggest secret, and that's why I went with it first. Secondly is your footwork. Specifically for flex shots, if we were to draw that line from basket to tee and draw it backwards, you kind of get like a little S kind of squiggly line, and the beginning of that starts with your footwork, and it starts typically from right to left as you progress forward. So focusing on that footwork and knowing how to start and how it translates into the rest of that flex shot flight is very important. And third, tips for flex shots is to build that trust between you and your overstable discs. Knowing that second half of the flight is going to be there. Knowing that you can start your discs on a very exaggerated anhyzer, and knowing that and trusting that they're going to fight back to flat and then fight back to a hyzer finish at the very end. So there you have it. Thank you for watching this episode of the Physics of Flight. Thank you for listening to me talk a bunch about flex shots. I love them so much. My game has just been built around those flex shots, and hopefully some of this knowledge that I've spoken into this microphone will help you learn the flex shots and become a little bit more excited about implementing them into your game. Thanks for watching. Be dynamic.
That's all for this episode of Physics of Flight. Make sure to let me know if you liked this episode with the thumbs up button down below, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode where we talk to Paige Pierce, Peter McBride, and Dustin Keegan.